Call the meeting to order. If we can stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Patrick, for coming. We have no written communication tonight. Do we have any board committee meetings since our last?
We have to give a young guy a picture of Emily present.
She'll be on. She said she was staying on for a few months, right?
I don't want the town board. All right, well, yes, with that, we'll turn it right over to the superintendent's report.
Great. Pleased to welcome our district clerk and business official, Mrs. Bazinski, for an update on our 21-22 budget.
21-22, thank you. So in December, it's my least favorite budget presentation because it has the most inaccuracies of all of them, because every single number is an estimate. But it gives us a chance to look at where we are so far into this year and what adjustments we've had to make for this year so far, and apply those adjustments to next year, along with anything else that we know may be coming. Just kind of gives us a head start and sets the groundwork for Superintendent Pinilla's department meetings and administrative meetings over the next 6 to 8 weeks, until we have some more solid numbers for our February presentation. So to start tonight, we'll stay with the same format, assumptions and projections for revenues and expenditures, an overall look, summary, and then any questions that you might have. So our property tax levy is all estimates at this point, with the exception of our tax-based growth factor. That was released earlier this week at 1.0056% of an increase in value for our town. CPI is currently estimated through the end of October, early November at about 1.43, well below the 2%, which is what everyone calls the tax cap, although it rarely is 2%. I've used an estimate of 1.4% just to be conservative, with the hopes that we'll be able to increase that as we go throughout the budget development process. As the final figures are released, we'll continue to update that, and we'll have our final tax cap calculation in February, and we'll submit it to the state by the end of February, early March. Our capital exclusion is another piece of our tax cap calculation, and that's the difference between our debt service and the aid we received to offset that. We're allowed to add that to our tax cap formula because those are expenditures that have already been authorized by our voters. So that is about $1.1 million, and we'll continue to monitor that as well and update that when we receive our state aid runs. At this point, state aid is a big question mark. We left every category flat with the exception of 2 known changes. We increased our BOCES aid about $381,000, and that's based on the IPA that we approved a couple meetings ago, so we know we're going to have an increase in revenue there. And our BOCES aid capital project payment. So next year is going to be our first payment. Normally with BOCES, you make the payments in 1 year, you get the aid in the next. But BOCES has arranged this project so that districts make the payments in July and get the aid that June. So it doesn't negatively affect one budget by $300,000. We only have to budget for the net. So we've been planning for this, and we'll talk about that a little later, but those 2 adjustments were made to the state aid because we do know that those will be coming. Miscellaneous revenues will be decreasing about 10% or just under $600,000. Much of that is due to Medicaid reimbursements being down. The services that we're providing are a little bit less. We're doing a lot more remote, and while some of those are Medicaid eligible, not all of them are. So we're just trying to keep those estimates in line with what we're seeing so far this year. We did budget a sales tax revenue decrease of 10% of what our normal budget would be for Erie County sales tax. It came in at about 94, 95% this past year. So 10% is a little conservative, but again, as the pandemic draws on, we don't really know what those numbers are going to look like. Our pilots are increasing about 35,000, and we have a net increase to our day tuition and our health service revenues of about 30,000. So all that together is what produces the 10% decrease overall. For transfers, this year we are going to maintain our current revenue transfers and our fund balance transfers. Normally we kind of back those out at the beginning of the year, and then we fill them in as we're going through budget development. But as we were talking about it, we were thinking keeping the exact same amount as we have in the current year plugged in here really shows us truly what our gap is for next year. Gives us a little bit clearer of a picture of how much we really need to change in order to get back to where we are current year. So again, these are all just estimates, and we can change those up or down as we're going along. One important thing we want to keep in mind is that $840,000 is coming out of our reserves. If we are to continue to use those funds every year, we have to make sure that at the end of the year, we're putting those monies back. Otherwise, eventually, it won't be available for us to use. And then finally, we have budgeted $220,000 of a transfer, which are the interest earnings on our capital fund that we can transfer in as a revenue, and it helps offset some of our payments. And that's been accumulating in our capital fund over the last few years as we've been borrowing and the money kind of sits there until we make our payments for our contractors. So this is the time we can start bringing that money in. Okay, so overall we have about a 1.7 increase in our property tax cap, which is about $640,000. State aid is estimated at a 6% increase, but that is strictly the BOCES aid that we know will be coming and the increase in building aid. Our miscellaneous revenues are a decrease, and then the transfers stayed the same with the exception of the $220,000 in interest earnings from the capital fund. Overall, it leaves us with a revenue budget of just under $64 million, just over a 2% increase. So on our expenditure side, we have our personnel, which are contractual obligations, estimated to increase about 2.5%. So that's about $756,000. It's a lot lower than what it's been at this time in previous years. So I was happy to see that number calculate out. And we have our substitute costs now. We increased them pretty significantly last year. We don't have a good handle on what our subs are going to look like this year, and everything is much different this year with remote learning. So we're just going to keep that kind of flat where it started. ERS rate is projected to go up to about 16.2%. It is an increase, but it's less than 2%, so it's not something that we can add to the tax cap calculation. Our TRS rate is projected to be anywhere between 9.5 and 10%. It usually does land in the lower part of the range when they give the projections, and currently it's 9.53 this year, so I just left it at 9.5, which is an increase of $58,000. FICA Med, Social Security, the rate stayed the same, but because our contractual payments are going up, that will go up as well, about $123,000. Health insurance, we've estimated a 3% increase. And we'll have better numbers on that later in the year, and that's something that, we can decide, being self-funded, where we want to take that. We've been working with all of our unions and our administrators trying to keep that increase low so that it benefits not only the district's budget, but also our members, because whatever our budget increases is typically what their premiums increase. So we want to try and keep those percentages low. There was a couple years where we had some larger increases, and if we can better control that, it's better for everybody. And workers' comp, our rates haven't been established yet, but we have a good experience rating. We have a bad year coming off and a good year coming on, so we're expecting those to stay stable. General support is almost flat. It's a 0.1% increase or $2,500. We have slight increase for liability insurance premiums and a little bit more in postage if we're going to match what we spent last year. But we also increased our budget in the current year, $10,000 for some water testing. That'll be completed this year, so those funds won't be needed for that reason next year. We're maintaining our $100,000 capital outlay project line in the event that we have the ability to do that work next year. And we've continued our $500,000 contingency line, which is offset by a fund balance, so it doesn't have a negative effect on the taxpayer. And if ever anyone wondered if that was a good thing to have in our budget, this is the perfect example of why it was, because it was a lifesaver this year for our budget. For instruction, we are looking at a 4% increase of about $175,000, and that is due to increase in charter tuition. We had a couple more students enroll in charter schools that are Amherst residents, and some of them are receiving special education services. So it was a little bit more for their tuition than the basic charter tuition. We are continuing our relationship with our grant writer, and our special education tuition and service expenses are increasing about $180,000. So now again, those are estimates, and that's assuming that every student that we have now getting every service that they have now will continue to get that service next year. And that's not a year-to-year increase. We had a handful of students move in this year, so part of that increase typically would have been budgeted this year had we known about them. So it's really a 2-year increase that we're catching up on for next year. We also talked about a transfer of technology equipment out of our instruction line down into our BOCES line, which will help offset our new IPA and the payments that we took on with the approval of the IPA for our technology replacement plan. So BOCES, there's a lot of changes in BOCES this year. These are still estimates, and these are big, broad strokes. We'll have some more detail after our participation meeting, which is scheduled for the end of January. But right now, we know that next year we'll have our second of 3 payments on the IPA that we approved this year. We're hoping that we'll have a second IPA next year because we want to add one each year. We have the capital project payment that we talked about, which is offset by a significant amount of state aid. And we have some special education tuition and services increase of about $228,000. And again, some of those are kids that are in this year. It also does not account for seniors that may be graduating or students that may be coming back to this program. We'll be working on that over the next couple weeks. Overall, we estimated a 2% increase in our BOCES lines, so those bigger pieces are above and beyond that. And then one thing to remember is within our BOCES budget currently, we have a $250,000 line for technology reimbursement, for technology replacements, so that we're applying to our IPAs. And we also had funds in our BOCES budget to support the Amplify Science program that we rolled out K-8 over the last couple of years. So as now that we have the majority of those materials and licenses in place, we can start to decrease the amount that we had set aside for that. So overall, with all of that together, we wanted to make sure that we pointed out that the anticipated revenue increases with the BOCES aid for the IPA and the capital project payment, along with the funds we already had budgeted in BOCES and the technology transfer, result in a budget neutral impact, even though we're adding these payments for our technology replacement plan, which was Superintendent Pinellas charged us when we came up with these plans, make it budget neutral so that it's not negatively affecting our taxpayers. Transportation, we accepted a 2-year extension last year. So it's a 1.5 increase, which is CPI, which is it's about there. So that's what we estimated. And our debt service, we don't have any new payments coming on the books. This is just our continuation of our existing payments. It's about an 11% increase, or about $585,000. Then we have the corresponding increase in state aid to help offset that. So overall, we have a 4% increase in expenditures, about $2.7 million. And that seems kind of high, it seems like a lot, but we need to remember that between the increase in BOCES and the increase in our debt service, which is offset by the increase in aid, our expenditures increase are pretty moderate if you were to have taken those numbers out. It leaves us with a projected expenditure budget of just over $65 million. So together, that leaves us with a $1.3 million gap. Again, a lot of assumptions, and we haven't applied any hard data as to the specifics of our student program changes. There's no staffing changes in here for retirements. None of that's incorporated yet. Revenues look to be increasing about 1.4 million, or just over 2%. Expenditures will be increasing about 2.7 or 4%. Most of it is BOCES, debt service, and then personnel and benefits, which is usually our largest increase every year. We have a $1.3 million gap, which does assume the same amount of fund balance and reserves that we have appropriated in the current year budget. And those we have every flexibility to change that as we go through the process. And then our gap closures remain the same as they are every year. Increases to state aid, salary breakage from retirements, spending reductions, additional increases in fund balance appropriations, the ability to go above the cap if we chose, and then additional appropriations from reserves. So this is just the start. This is the snapshot, and we'll have a much more detailed and accurate budget presentation for you in February.
Can you tell us how is our state aid payments for this year? Is it still maintaining the 20% with being withheld?
At the beginning of the year, all of our 2019-20 payments were withheld to 20%, and then we had a big payment in September, which is offsetting our TRS payment, so that was made in full, but we don't see that money because they take what they're giving as our TRS payment, and then our next big payment is upcoming. So I haven't heard from Barb that we had any more big deductions. The majority of them were over the summer when it first was announced and everything started getting cut. That was almost more upsetting than knowing that some of the future ones were getting paid or being reduced because we had no way to plan for it. We had no way to anticipate it. Our UBK grant was cut 20% after we had been authorized to spend it. After we spent it, the reimbursement came back and it was only 80% of what we had spent. But we also don't know yet if those are true cuts or if they're just holds. So there is still hope out there that they're just holds, and that when the rest of the state aid payments are released through the year, that those funds will be sent as well.
One of the recent press conferences proposed on threatening the 20% cut. We had gotten a question from the press, and he said that the next payment is soon, right? December?
We get different schools get them at different months, but we do have December and January.
Yeah, he's still threatening to withhold because of lack of federal money.
What kind of revenue did the grant writer bring in this year, Penny?
So last year, we were with our grant writer for 3 of the 4 quarters, so we didn't spend the full $31,000, it was like $24,000, and we brought in roughly $29,000. This year, we only had 1 grant approved. It was a target grant for $1,000, but we have in the hopper still waiting for approval about $282,000. So we'll see. So there's a large amount out there, the grants have been written, and we're just waiting to hear back. So it's exciting, so we'll see.
So, sorry I missed it, but with the ERS and TRS, are those our projected numbers, or are those numbers that they said that you ought to be looking for?
Those have been released. The 16, I think it was 16.2 that has been released. And then the TRS has been released as a range of 9.5 to 10%. So we don't have that estimate yet, but it usually comes in towards the bottom of their projected range. So we were already at 9.53%, so I just left it at 9.5 for this year.
Thank you very much. Again, there's a lot that happens between now and April. I think our advocacy efforts, when we start having that conversation, should be focused on the federal level. As Mrs. Goldhawk mentioned, the governor said he's not going to do anything until he sees what the federal government does as it relates to cutting or taxing. And he's hoping for $15 billion to plug his budget gap. So we'll see. There's some optimism there based on the early messages coming out of the president-elect's cabinet there, but we'll definitely have to wait and see what comes on January 20th and beyond. That's all we have for the superintendent's report tonight.
Okay, we need a motion for two business items.
I'll make a motion for the business items D1, A through K, 2, A through D, 3, B, C, E, G, and H.
We have a second.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving new business items E1, A through K, 2, A through D, and 3B, C, E, G, and H, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Do we have any follow-up action items? We will need a motion to convene to executive session.
I'll make a motion to convene to executive session regarding After-Service Staff Association contract negotiations.
We have a second? All in favor of convening to executive session, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Patrick.